Salut à tous, merci de nous retrouver pour votre émission Kaboom. Merci. L'émission tout spécialement dédiée à la bande dessinée. N'en doutez pas, la BD c'est un art. T-H-I-B-U-T, ouais, avec un T, ouais. Et pour certains, c'est même un art invisible.
My name is Scott McCloud. I'm an American cartoonist and I've been making comics since 1984. I write about comics and I do fiction comics. When I began writing Understanding Comics, I had a big pile of ideas about how comics work. But as soon as I started writing the book, other ideas came to me. You know, what happened is I had a picture that was partially filled in. I didn't fully understand. A lot of it had to do with the way words and pictures combined. But as I worked on the book, I had to figure it out. You don't sit down to write a book about comics because you have all the answers. You sit down to write a book about comics because you want to find the answers. I chose comics as my art form when I was only maybe 15 years old. And I think that one of the reasons I knew is because I wanted the control that comics affords. Because only in comics can you completely control the process. If you make a film, you need hundreds, maybe thousands of people to work with you. And the idea you have in your head, maybe you're lucky, maybe only 20%, maybe 25% of what you see in your head winds up on the screen. If you're a writer, if you're a novelist, you have to collaborate with the reader in a way where the reader imagines everything. Yes, you have control over the words on the page, but you don't have as much control over what you want the reader to see. In comics, there's more control than almost any other form, and I love that because I'm a control freak, because I'm crazy, because I want to force you to see the world as I see it. When I was studying comics when I was young, I was very excited by the world between the panels. This to me was what comics was all about. You show a picture, you show another picture, and it's in between those pictures that the art of comics happens, because the reader has to use their imagination to create the motion, the change, the life between those panels. It's not like any other form. I called it comics the invisible art because to me, the art of comics was that invisible world between the panels. Also because comics was a world about invisibles in other ways. Things that can't be seen, like sound. We have to capture sound. We have to make everything visible, even the invisible worlds of our other senses. And it's an invisible art because the art of comics sometimes is invisible to ordinary people who don't see it as an art form, who see it as just entertainment, but it's much, much more. Mainstream media, radio broadcasters, television, they're beginning to really pay attention to comics in a way that they weren't. Cartoonists are being chosen as influential people of the world. Graphic novels are being awarded literary prizes. All of this stuff is progress for the art form. The art form is finally getting the recognition and the respect it deserves. There are few artists when I was beginning who inspired me. One of the first was Jack Kirby in the United States, although I didn't realize it was Kirby's ideas that I was seeing reflected in other artists. Then I discovered what Will Eisner had been doing years before, and what Will Eisner was starting to do with his graphic novels about the same time. This would have been the 70s when I was still a teenager. Then I discovered Heavy Metal, which was the American publication of Metal Herland. And artists like Mobius and Drie were very exciting to me as a teenager as I was going into college. Then I discovered manga. And I was very excited by the work of especially Osamu Tezuka, the god of manga, who did 150,000 pages of comics. He did big robot comics, he did samurai comics, he did romance comics, he did medieval adventure comics, and each one of those genres then became a genre that other artists picked up. So he was like the trunk of a tree, and the whole manga world grew out of that diversity. I finally discovered why Hergé was such a legend, and I came to understand that there were these different worlds of comics, how comics in Japan, comics in Europe, and comics in America had all evolved in different ways. I came to understand that there were certain ideas that ran through each one of those cultures. In the Franco-Belgian tradition, because of Hergé, there was this sense of world building. And you saw it in Mobius. You saw it in many of the great BD artists 10, 20, 30, 40 years after Hergé. There was still that love of building worlds. You know, you see it in Schweten and Peters. You saw it in Tardy. You see it. All these artists, they took the time to create their worlds. In Japan, it was different, though. It was all about creating that sense of participation, making you feel like you are here. And that's what the great manga artists were able to do. And then in America, there was that sense of the lone protagonist, and there was almost a sense of theater, like we were always playing to the reader, playing to the audience. And that was true from Kirby to the comic strips like Charles Schultz to you know, a lot of the modern superhero artists. And so each land was different. Once the ideas from Japan started reaching Europe and European ideas started reaching Japan, then you have international artists like Miyazaki or Otomo. They're incorporating that sense of world building that Hergé was so passionate about, and that all the BD artists after Hergé were passionate about. Starting in the 90s, computers and comics became very linked in three ways. One of them was that people started using computers to make comics. First, maybe just lettering, maybe just coloring, but then to actually create the work. That's changing how comics are made. Then distribution, the chance to use computers and the internet to transmit comics directly to the audience. So all of a sudden, all the publishers, the editors, the shops, all of that stuff, you have a shortcut that cuts right through it. That was very important. That's still very important. And it's still very disruptive. A lot of people don't know quite how to deal with that. And then you had the chance to change the shape of comics online. The artistic challenges of creating comics that are just zeros and ones, just bits. And that's something I think we're only still trying to understand. And I think many people are still grappling with that. The nice thing about the internet is tens of thousands of people can try tens of thousands of solutions. Whatever works, works. Simple as that. Paper is never going away. Books are never going away. My graphic novel that I'm working on is a book. You know, and I think that there are limitations to print and limitations to digital, but you work within those limitations. But what I think is you design for the device. Sometimes that device is a book. Sometimes that device is your iPad. Sometimes it's the computer screen you have at home. But you try to create with that in mind. You don't make one comic and expect it to work on every different device. For the last 15 years or so, I've been working completely digitally. I don't use paper and ink at all. I draw my comics on what we call a Cintiq tablet, where I draw directly on the screen. And I love it. I love that way of working. It's not good for everybody. Some people, they love the feel of paper. They love the feel of a brush or a pen. I like to be able to change things. I like to be able to move things around. I like to be able to hit undo, you know? Because I'm always making decisions. For me, making comics is about decisions. Right now I'm working on a graphic novel. It's 480 pages long, and it's a very, very big story. I've been working on it for a few years now, and this was the first time that I worked very seriously on fiction as a writer for many, many years. It's hard. I'm always writing about how comics work, and that's how most people know me. So sometimes when I sit down to be a cartoonist, it can be a little bit hard because now I have to take all those theories and I have to bury them in the ground. I don't want to make stories like a theorist. I want to make stories like a storyteller, and I want the stories to be very transparent, intuitive, and sometimes you have to put the theory away. Sometimes you have to maybe be less of a scientist and more of an artist.
Voilà, Kaboom touche à sa fin. Vous pouvez nous retrouver tout de suite sur notre page Facebook pour revoir nos émissions, découvrir des actus BD et les coulisses de votre émission bande dessinée favorite. Bon allez, je vais devoir vous laisser, vous en avez l'habitude, je m'en fous, j'ai pas peur.